Alrighty, I think we'll kick things off. I hope you can see the slides and the screen. Let us know if not. Hopefully, but really excited for today. So, good afternoon. My name is Matt Levy, based here in Oakland, California, and I'm the Vice President of Evaluation and Learning at First Place for Youth.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Evans, and I'm the Data and Analytics Manager here at First Place for Youth, and I'm calling out of Los Angeles.
So we are fortunate enough to be your guides and hosts for this session today. But please know we want this to be as participatory and learning oriented as can be. So feel free to use the chat. Raise your hand if that's a function too, if you'd like to kind of share questions or comments as well. We're not only here to kind of share some of our learnings, right, from are we doing it right to does it work, right, experiences from our own evidence learning journey, but also to learn from each of you, because all of you are going to have really amazing learnings from your own journey as well. We'd also love to just know who's in the room. So if you don't mind, practice using the chat. We'd love to just know your name and your organization, so we have a bit of a sense of who's here with us today. As you introduce yourselves to us and to each other, know we are talking about evidence and the terms like fidelity and evaluation. Sometimes those can feel a bit scary. So if any of you do feel like this, like a cat with ears back, hiding under the table, no, that's okay, right? It's totally normal. We have so many colleagues that feel like this. Our hope is by the end, that you will feel a bit more confident about research, evaluation, outcomes tracking, and more by the end of today. So again, as you continue to introduce yourselves, we have another kind of blurb for the chat. We'd love to know a bit about where you are in your evidence building journey. We'd love to kind of make sure we're zooming in on pieces that may feel particularly new or unfamiliar, right, to many of you. So here are some options, right? And you throw it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. When you think about you and your program, maybe it's a program you work for, a program you fund and support or partner with. But where are you? Are you A, just starting to think about measurement? So you're just starting to think about those outputs, those outcomes and activities. B, are you a bit further along and now you have kind of data collection processes in place? Maybe they're not totally perfect, but you at least got some data collection tools in place. C, right? Are you using data, this data from your system regularly to guide CQI, which is continuous quality improvement? So you're continually using data to guide learning and innovation. Or D, right? Are you preparing for participating in or have already completed some sort of formal impact evaluation or outcomes study?
Got lots of B's and C's in the chat. So it looks like a lot of you have already started off and are in the middle of the process. So perfect.
Fantastic. We've even got a D in there as well. So again, know that in this session, we'd love to hear from you all about your experiences with pieces of this. We're going to kind of go through each of these steps, right? A, B, C, and D. But before we do, we just want to introduce who First Place for Youth is, in case you don't know or are unfamiliar with our work, because that's really our grounding, right? That's where our expertise comes in as evaluators working at First Place for Youth. So we've been around since 1998, and we serve transition age youth, primarily transition age foster youth, who've aged out of the foster care system. We started in California, but we've since expanded to 6 other states around the country. We serve over 1,500 young people every year around the country. Our kind of biggest and oldest program is My First Place. It's a scattered site housing placement within extended foster care here in California and other states. And then it can vary in length from 1 or to up to 5 years. Really depends on county and state funding as well as laws and policies about participation in extended foster care. When we say scattered site housing, we mean just housing that's based in the community. So we're not housing young people just in one building, right? We are renting and securing units throughout the community as well. So really trying to place our young people, those we serve, throughout the community as well. Some of the things that we believe makes our program a bit unique, it's really focused on team-based support. So each of our young people in our program is being served by multiple staff. A key one is the youth advocate. So this is kind of your classic case manager, really handling a multitude of needs, meeting with our young people on a weekly basis. And then we also have a second member of the team that's the education employment specialist, really focused on education, employment, as well as kind of career identification and career development as well. The team is rounded out with, someone doing intake. We have a housing team kind of securing and managing housing as well as maintenance and things like that. And of course, supervisors and managers to oversee all that. Our practices are really grounded in these practice philosophies like cultural humility, trauma-informed care, positive youth development, and harm reduction. All of these to say, right, when we train our staff and think about our model, it's really about serving the young people, young person who's in front of us, where they are today, on their best day and on their worst day. We want to serve and support them to the best of our abilities. Um, when we think about outcomes, right, since we're going to be talking a lot about evaluation and research today, core to, what we've heard from our young people, what they want help with and what we're striving for with them when we think about our mission, is a focus not just on enrollment in school, but actually progress and attainment therein, whether that's secondary or post-secondary education. So high school, right, or beyond high school. It's also about identifying and developing that career pathway. Third, right, we're looking at that progress towards a sustainable, life-sustaining wage. So it's not probably going to happen at 20 or 21, but can we get them on the ladder to that life-sustaining wage, maybe after our program? And last but by no means least, this is so important. We know housing is the foundation for all of this. That's why housing is a big part of what we do. And we really hope and strive to support all of our young people in exiting not only into stable housing, but having a long-term plan for housing stability as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Michael, who's going to frame a bit of our kind of our day today, our workshop today.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. So that's who First Place is, and that's our background a little bit. But for today's workshop, we're going to be walking you all through our five-step journey to building evidence via our impact evaluation that Chapin Hall conducted for us. So the five steps are foundation, assessment, improvement, analysis, and then finally that impact evaluation itself. So now I'll just quickly walk through each step. So foundation, this is the step where you start to build your theory of change. You define a logic model, which includes who you're serving, what you do for those clients, and what you expect a successful program outcome to be. So for First Place, we identified that we're going to serve extended foster care. We're going to do those intensive care services, and then we have those expected outcomes of education, employment, and stable housing. Once you have that program model in place and you're implementing it on the ground and it's up and running, then you want to start conducting assessments, right? So that's where you're going to start evaluating, honestly evaluating. You have to be independent, right? And acknowledge the conflict of interest, but honestly evaluate whether your program is ready to be studied. So this is where you'd start to build the evidence of does the evidence exist to show that what your program does it well? Once you start to build that assessment, through us, it was a valuability assessment, but you can do it internally or externally. That will result in identifying a lot of strengths, but also areas that have room to grow. Maybe there's some aspects of your program that are going above and beyond what you thought. You're seeing really strong outcomes, but maybe there's some aspects of your program that aren't quite hitting that mark. So that will come up in assessment. And then in the improvement phase, that's when you start to use that data to continuously strengthen what you're doing, not just to report on it to external evaluators. From there, then you can start to analyze your program. So you start to dig into your own outcomes and understand what exactly is working, for whom, and where the risks are before you put your program under this rigorous test, such as an impact evaluation. Once you're confident that those four steps are completed and you may find that you're jumping, it's not necessarily linear, then you enter that final step of impact evaluation. So here's where you would ask and ultimately answer the hardest question. Does this program actually make a difference? So while that is what we will be talking about in this workshop, unfortunately we don't have all day, so we won't be able to cover everything that went into this process. So here are some of the things we won't have time to cover. First of all, we won't be able to cover the pros and cons of different evaluation approaches. Each program is unique and independent of its own, even if they're working in the same sector or something like that. And there's going to be different evaluation approaches to better understand, is this program working? Unfortunately, we just don't have time to go over all the different options there. Similarly, while randomized controlled trials, RCTs, are kind of the gold standard of like scientific exploration and building evidence, there's a lot of ethics about implementing that kind of design in social services, such as working with foster youth. So we also, unfortunately, don't have the time to cover the ethics behind that. And finally, it was a really big process, a huge aspect of our own process was this inclusion for us of youth voice or lived experience. And while we had that lived experience at the table from the top down, we had colleagues who had lived experience, but we also interviewed and brought in a lot of youth experience from our own program participants. We won't be able to dive into the importance of that aspect of the evaluation. All right, so where did first place start when we decided, all right, we want to go on this five-step journey. We want to really build this evidence and show to the world how powerful our program is. This is where we were. So you can kind of think of these as the prerequisites that would empower and enable you to be successful on this journey. So that the impact evaluation results in the evidence that you wanted. So first of all, when we started, we were already pretty well established. We were an intensive program serving hundreds of youth, and we had strong belief that our model was working. We had a lot of youth exiting with success stories, and we were hearing a lot of positive things. Then we also had a high-level theory of change and a detailed logic model. In a second, I'm going to go over a really high-level version of our logic model just to give you a sense of it, but it's something that was really fleshed out, had lots of input from all over the board and all over different levels gone into it. Finally, we also had our own data system that we not only owned, but we also had explicit control of. So that meant we can alter it to suit our own purposes. If we decide, if we identify that like, oh, we need to track such and such data better, we were able to implement those changes. And that was a big strength of ours. And then finally, also an essential component is we had really strong commitment and investment, not only from the CEO, but from program leadership and all the decision makers in our organization, that building evidence of our program was particularly important. Okay, so at the top is the mission statement and then a really high level of our logic model. So first, the mission statement for First Place is, the mission of First Place is to help foster youth build the skills they need to make a successful transition to self-sufficiency and a responsible adulthood. The logic model underlying that mission statement then, at a high level, is that at intake, at the beginning of our program, we're going to provide stable housing and intensive case management over 12 months or longer. So that's where those essential staff roles that Matt mentioned come in. As youth are in program or program participants are going through this, they're starting to gain skills and build stability. They're building those education skills of enrolling in post-secondary education opportunities, or they're building those career skills of going through interviews. But at the same time, they're also going through essential life skills, right? So learning how to take care of their homes and build important community connections. As they exit the program, then they're going to exit with stable housing as well as education and employment progress that sets them up for self-sufficiency and responsible adulthood. And now I believe I pass it back to Matt.
That's right. Thank you. And everyone, feel free again, use the chat if you have questions or there's any terms we're not kind of defining. Want to hear from you. So let's start with step one. So if we mentioned kind of some of those prerequisites, right, of having that data system, having a sense of logic behind your program, meaning you have a sense of activities and outcomes. Well, a big part of that foundation, right, is also fidelity, what your program does. The analogy we like to use that we've seen kind of resonate with various audiences, including our own program participants, is this is your recipe. What is your secret sauce? What is the recipe for your program? That's really what fidelity is striving to do. The formal definition, of course, is that fidelity is the extent to which a program is delivered as designed. So your chefs are creating this recipe, and now we have to check to see if we're still implementing that recipe as designed. That can be done month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, and site to site, right? All of those are ways in which you can look at how your program is being implemented. When you think about strong fidelity measures, there's a whole kind of science and discourse around this, right? Um, these strong fidelity measures can help each of us, each of our programs, ensure that consistent high quality service delivery across all sites. It also doesn't have to be consistent. Fidelity can bring in, right, a triaging of services that allows for equity in services, not just equality in services. Strong fidelity measures can also help to identify where specific, particular sites or programs may need support or training. If all of your sites are struggling with a particular piece of fidelity, a particular piece of the recipe, what additional coaching or resourcing do they need to handle that? Or if it's one or two sites, what kind of support or coaching do they need? Are they experiencing turnover, right? Staffing turnover is a common cause for fidelity metrics not being hit. Are the benchmarks too high, right? You can also allow for some reassessment and redesign or rethinking of what constitutes fidelity. And last but by no means least, but strong fidelity measures have been shown in the research and literature out there that it can actually lead to really strong outcomes. Programs that have fidelity measures, right? Much more likely to have strong outcomes than programs that don't or programs that struggle to meet fidelity, which makes a lot of intuitive sense because your fidelity metrics has a logic behind it or a theory behind it that by doing these things, we serve our clients, our participants, in achieving these things, which is kind of the outcomes that we're all looking at and measuring. I welcome folks to, share in the chat as well. Any kind of fidelity metrics you track, any kind of core ingredients that may be a part of your program, or even any questions, right, of areas that maybe are a bit tougher to measure. Some things we want to measure aren't always measurable. As you share that in the chat, we'll just give an example of what is our kind of recipe for our My First Place program today. So we have 12 fidelity metrics, and they really fall in two pillars. On the left pillar, right, we're talking about structure. So there's certain structures in place for our recipe, for our program, that sites need to have to be implementing this program. Some of that is staffing, right? Each site is going to have a youth advocate and an education and employment specialist. They're also going to have someone doing intake and someone providing supervision. When we think about the staffing too, what's important is not just the position, but the caseload. So what is that kind of ideal caseload for us? For our youth advocates, we're looking at caseloads of 15 to 1. For education employment specialists, we're looking at caseloads of 30 to 1 or smaller. That regular supervision, of course, is a key structure as well. We look at weekly supervision as kind of being really best practice and core to effective and quality services. And then since we are providing housing, right? So a structure for us having housing is not just having people who know housing, but we need to be conducting housing quality inspections. These are national standards that can be catered, of course, to local standards as well, since housing laws and regulations may vary. But these inspections allow us to ensure that we're providing quality housing to all of our young people in some sort of consistent, measurable way as well. So that's one side of fidelity metrics. The other side is services on the right. So some other things we look at that we believe are core to our program are actually engaging our young people regularly. So we're looking at the quantity and frequency of our engagements. Our youth advocates, we have an expectation that at minimum they're meeting with their caseload, with 80% of their caseload, right? 3 times a month, face to face. Right? So face to face, 3 times a month, 80% of their caseload. We're building in flexibility to our metrics. That's again the minimum standard. Fidelity is not your maximum standard. That might be something in your contract. Fidelity is your minimum standard that allows for some flexibility due to staff leave, crises, you name it, right? There are many reasons why certain things may not be possible week in, week out. We also look at on-time assessments and action plans. So these are something we have twice a year, right? And these are really meant to be youth-driven and youth-guided. So we understand the youth's goals, what in their action plan, what are their goals for the next few months? What are their steps they want to take towards those goals? And how can we support them? Who can we connect them to support them with those goals as well? Michael, I don't know if we got any responses in the chat in terms of any folks wanting to share some of their own fidelity metrics.
We do not, but I would encourage you all to be brave and share with them because everyone here can stand to learn from each other. It's not just us.
And if anyone wants to come off mute, totally want to welcome your voice into the room if you'd prefer to join that way. And if not, we'll continue. But don't hesitate. Please do share your questions, your ideas. I'll just add, right, in the spirit of learning, right, we are currently revising our fidelity metrics for my first place because so many of these metrics focus on what happened, the quantity, but not necessarily the quality of what happened. Quality is a lot harder to measure, but we think it's really important to ensure that our young people are also getting quality services. So we're going to bring things in from our Youth Voice survey. We ask our clients twice a year for their perspectives on our program, their housing, and our staff. So it's a great opportunity for us to bring their voices on quality into fidelity. We haven't perfected what exactly that's going to look like, but just in the spirit of learning, that's a direction we're trying to move next with our fidelity metrics. What's next, Michael?
All right. So after the foundation is set, like I mentioned before, then you're going to start assessing program consistency and quality. You're going to start assessing those fidelity measures. So that might come in the form of an evaluability assessment, which is what our own organization went through. And while a lot of people, of course, understand their own programs very well, there's a lot of benefits to having a valuability assessment done, and it's well worth the energy and costs associated with it. So first of all, having a valuability assessment or formally assessing your program internally or externally, um, one major benefit of that is it assesses your program model implementation. So you have your logic model, you have your theory of change, you have your fidelity measures, but it's important to assess them. Is your model on the ground actually being implemented as designed? Through that, then you can start to identify current strengths and areas to improve. Like I mentioned before, you might find some areas are like, whoa, we're doing really well on this. And you might find somewhere like, okay, we're not hitting the mark. Let's focus on that. Let's zoom in. Um, with those identified, then you kind of have an idea of the feasibility of an impact study. Is your program mature enough and operating as defined well enough to have that really formal evaluation where you're ready to show the world, hey, here's what our program does and here's why it's so great. Um, as similarly, you can also then strengthen evaluation capacity. Through that assessment process, you might realize that like, oh, we're not able to look at such and such in the level of detail that we want. So then you might go back and strengthen that evaluation capacity. And finally, having an evaluability assessment, having this kind of formal in-depth look at your program builds a lot of credibility with funders and partners. So as I mentioned, we did our own evaluability assessment some years ago, and we learned a lot from it. So for our own benefits, I mean, for our own purposes, we learned that program is implemented with a strong adherence to fidelity measure. We had those 12 fidelities, we were measuring them monthly, and the evaluability assessment found that that was the case, that our program was being implemented as designed. Specifically, some of the program strengths that were arisen was we had really strong staff engagement with the youth. Staff were building really youth-centered relationships, building really strong rapport with their clients. Um, and then that similarly led to a very strong youth employment model. A lot of our youth were not only getting jobs, often for the first time, their very first job, but they were holding those jobs, and many were exiting with those employments still in place. So not only was our program successful in connecting people with employment opportunities, it was also successful in supporting young people as they build up the strength to keep that employment, which as a young person is really difficult, right? There's a lot to learn there. And then finally, one particular strength that was identified was a strong data culture across our organization. As I mentioned before, we had a strong buy-in from leadership that data and building evidence was really important, but it was across the whole board. We have dashboards for our direct service providers, for our YAs and EEs that they use regularly. We have dashboards and they provide data to managers to help them with their supervision. And that current data structure we had was a really strong strength for an external impact study. That being said, we also identified areas where we need to improve. A big part of our program is education and employment. And while employment was really strong, the valuability assessment identified that our education component wasn't quite hitting that mark. We had a lot of youth who were enrolling in post-secondary education opportunities. Some were enrolling in 2-year or 4-year universities. Some were going into full-time internships or vocational school. But there wasn't as much movement there as we would like. There wasn't as many youth making substantial progress through those education programs or attaining the credentials that then secure them for more career-focused employment. And then the other area that was identified to improve was formalizing partnerships with our community mental health partners. So in talking with the young people, it was identified that our program, there was a big need for stronger mental health provisions and supports, particularly within the community and from perspectives that would relate with the young people. All right, Matt, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So much of learning and research, right, can happen in a place of discomfort because we're talking about our strengths, but we're also talking about our gaps. So our valuability assessment is very clear about some of that gaps. And that really speaks to that next step, right? Where evaluation and research can play such a great role because it's all about learning. So this third phase, improvement, is really something that can live on no matter where you are in your journey. It's so critical to that. Um, and so, I don't know, and folks in the chat share what your frameworks are. You know, some people use PDSA, plan, do, study, act cycles, or test and learn. But there might even be other frameworks and methods you all use. But for your CQI, right, continuous quality improvement, share in the chat just some of those ways in which you learn and improve. And I'll tell a story or two about what we did based on that evaluability assessment. So in 2019, right, we had that evaluability assessment, and it was quite clear and this wasn't unusual to us, right, but like many of our peers in our space, there's a foster care to community college pipeline. But what's happening is high enrollment, not necessarily the progress or attainment that we're hoping for. So we didn't know the solution yet, right? A good continuous quality improvement process, you're going to start with the problem first, right? What really is the problem? What's going on? You're asking this question why a lot at the start of any CQI process. And so we're very fortunate we have some amazing and dedicated partners on the education employment side who were asking themselves that question. So this is the finding. Why is this the case? They were speaking to each other. They started asking some of our clients as well. Why is it, right? A young person's enrolling but not progressing. They partnered with us to kind of help them kind of sort through some of that feedback. And it seemed like there were two key reasons why young people weren't progressing in their post-secondary education. One was motivation. Young people were enrolled, but they didn't know why they enrolled, right? They were just kind of told that's the thing to do now, enroll in college. Um, they didn't know how it connected to maybe their own careers and goals after that program. The second was financial. They might enroll, but then realize actually they need income to afford kind of daily expenses or have some sort of disposable income. So they prioritize work over school. And that was a big barrier to staying in classes, doing the work, and progressing through their post-secondary education. So we now have a sense of the problem, right? Your next step in any classic CQI process or improvement process is to think about solutions. And our team kind of spoke to peers, organizations, looked at some of what's out there, and really came up with something that's not that novel, right? It's college counseling. It exists in high schools and colleges and career coaches all over the country, all over the world. So we thought, how do we bring that into our program? And so what you're actually looking at here is a screen grab of the flyer our staff use with young people to coach about what are the available options. So here we're defining what are those kind of five kind of options for post-secondary education from what is community college and what they offer to state university to earn and learn, right? So these are your pre-apprenticeships, your internships, your paid work experience, as well as your apprenticeships. We also have a version of this for every site that speaks to who are those partners in LA, in Oakland, in San Francisco, in San Jose, in Fairfield, in Mississippi, right? In Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Who are those local partners? Um, we have community college to earn and learn that our young people can investigate. So this intervention is happens in the first 9 months of our program now. But 6 years ago, we didn't do it. So again, like we took this feedback from our availability assessment to say, what can we do differently to better connect young people to interests, to their interests and their skills and their style of learning to both schools and careers. The second piece of our kind of improvement and learning agenda was tied to the financial side. So if PSE coaching is really about the motivation, well, then we're also curious, well, how do we address some of the financials? And yeah, we can help our young people ensure they're getting the maximum financial aid and Chafee grants and all of that, but that's not going to solve the problem fully. And so one of the things we looked at was how do we expand earn and learn, apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship opportunities? How do we offer that to more of our young people? Because by and large, we only had, 10 years ago, a handful of young people who would ever enroll in these types of programs and opportunities. And so through a lot of trial and error, emphasis on error, right? We got a lot wrong, and it took us 3 to 4 years, I think, to really codify the ways in which to do this well. Um, we now have a program, an earn and learn program with a series of partners in each of our sites in which we operate that are providing hands-on learning. They pay from day one. And so that meant either finding opportunities that pay or fundraising for additional capital and money so that we can pay our young people to enroll in these programs. That's a big part of kind of our fundraising strategy and agenda. And so if we went from, say, 5 to a dozen young people doing these types of opportunities who found it maybe on their own or had a savvy staff who knew about an opportunity in a certain sector. Michael was just doing some research earlier this week, and we saw that a third of our young people in California, right, so the kind of recent either active youth or exited youth, a third of them had actually completed an earn and learn. That's over 150 young people had completed an earn and learn opportunity. Maybe not in the last 12 months, but in the last 2 to 3 years, right? We've been seeing kind of tremendous growth and adoption of this. So there's a desire of our young people for this hands-on learning opportunity, the pay from day one, addressing kind of some of the financial challenges as well, and some success in our vetting of good partners that tie to career opportunities and other things. So improvement, CQI, right, goes by so many names. I think what's so critical, whatever you do, wherever you are, is to listen, right, to your staff, your clients, your participants, and think about ways in which you can enhance program and be okay with some setbacks, be okay with those first few cycles of learning not going that well. 'Cause that's what happened with us, right? We started Earn and Learn, and well, we did it in 2020. So we didn't get many enrollments, and there weren't many partners who were able to do earn and learn. So we had a lot of cycles of failure. And I think that's a word we can get scared of in the social sector. Just want to make sure there's any questions. Is there any questions in the chat, Michael? Anything to address now?
Yeah, so Taiwan just mentioned that not said this is great. Not all young adults want to attend college, but trade schools are very scarce now. So this earn and learn model tried to address that because we also experienced the same thing. We were looking for a lot of formal full-time apprenticeship programs, and they're very difficult to get into, and there's just not very many. So this earn and learn was kind of a way of how do we bridge that gap to getting people on the job experience, similar to a trade school where they're learning valuable career skills but then it also directly ties them into a career pathway. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that, Matt.
Great question. Yeah, I'll just add that we're looking, and this was, again, kudos to our EE department, full credit really there and all of their work and participating in conferences and talking to workforce experts. Um, they looked also at what are those careers in each of our sites or each of our counties that have high growth potential in terms of jobs. So they're actually not just they're going to get a certification, but there's a tie to some kind of life-sustaining job opportunity thereafter. And it doesn't require, a dozen different certificates and things that might take a decade to gain. What's attainable in 6 months, right? And then like let's stack on top of that. Nursing and healthcare, right? Is a high growth sector, I think everywhere we operate. And so we made sure to prioritize healthcare partnerships and look at different opportunities like from phlebotomy to nursing to building on top of like a CNA, certified nursing assistant, to an RN and other things. We made sure to develop partnerships in those spaces. So yeah, it's not just your classic trades, right? When you think about plumbing and construction, there's so much more than that. And I think that's been part of that success. Here we have an associate teacher, so preschool. YMCA has a wonderful apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship program as well that we've partnered with them. Or CVS, right? Pharmacy technicians has been a great area where we've had noticed a lot of interest from our young people. And again, it has both the pre-apprenticeship option, which might be like a 6-week program, or the apprenticeship option, which I think is more like 6+ months. So there's different ways to kind of enter the field, experiment, see if it's for them, and if so, continue.
Then also Vicky and Verna, sorry if I mispronounced your name, just mentioned that they're working in middle school populations, but find that
Mhm.
it's helpful to think that this is good to show students that there's opportunities besides long-term school and careers. And I think the
Mhm.
other benefit of kind of one, I think that's great. It'd be great to talk that through young adult and young people, right? 10 as young as possible. I don't think it's too early to start. But it also, I think an important aspect of it is demystifying what it looks like to become a nurse. What does it look like to become a doctor versus a nurse? What do those jobs actually entail? What does a pharmacy technician look like? What are the wages? And I think pulling back the curtain behind a lot of the magic that happens between that makes it feel a lot more attainable, right? And it's like, oh, okay, I don't actually have to suddenly jump from this step to that step. I can take this stairway to go up there. So that's a great point, Vicky and Bjorna.
Awesome. Thank you. So again, improvement is kind of that third step, right? From we talked about the foundation, the assessment. Assessment can help you to improve. You can do a lot of back and forth from assessment to improvement. You can do assessment, then improvement, go back to assessment and improvement. Think of it as cycles, not as clear linear steps, but things that feed each other and help ensure, right, meeting the needs of both staff and young people being served. But Michael's going to talk about our fourth phase right now.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So once you're finished with that step, then you're moving into analyzing patterns in your data. So you've learned about the different strengths and areas of improvement in your program. You've used the data you have to whatever, build continuous quality improvements on there and to address them. And you're feeling confident, like, okay, things are looking the way we want. So now let's dig in deeper and start analyzing the patterns in data. So for our own process, that started out first with a funder identifying a data source. So back in 2022, one of our funders reached out to us with an opportunity to gather earnings and employment data on program alumni. And important is what they were doing was going to connect with California's employment development division, meaning that we would get data directly from the government about how our young people are doing in the employment sector. I don't know about you all, but often when young people exit a program, it can be really difficult to get consistent data on where they're at and how they're doing. So this was a really unique way of getting like high quality data for young people exiting up to 3 years after program exit. So with that opportunity, we then started to draft learning questions. Drafted learning questions about what are some different subgroups we want to look at. We looked at demographics to make sure our program was operating with equity. We wanted to see like, oh, how do young people who complete our Earn and Learn program, how do they fare 3 years after program exit versus young people who didn't pursue Earn and Learn? And just a variety of things like that. So we submitted those questions and our request for data to the California's Employment and Development Division, and we got back the data in aggregate, meaning we didn't get back individual level for each youth, but we were able to get back youth of the Black youth that we served, or the white youth we served, or the youth who completed Earn and Learn as a whole. And then finally, when we started to review that data with an external consultant, we found that youth who completed our program compared to youth who were eligible for our program but ultimately did not enroll showed higher earnings as far as 3 years post-exit. So with this data and after reviewing it with an external data consultant, we felt that we were at a very strong place for a formal impact evaluation. So Matt, let's just go look at some of that data real quick. Okay, so here's a little line graph showing median earnings by completion status. Left to right is going to be relative year of exit. So that dashed line in the middle is 0, meaning end of program. We're looking at young people who exited our program from 2016 to 2022. So if a young person exited program in 2016, that means 0 would be 2016. And then they merge all that data to be aligned. So that way we can look like on average, 3 years after exit at different cohorts, what were they earning? Bottom to top is going to be median earnings, and then we have 3 different lines. The dark blue line on the bottom of the graph is youth who were eligible for our program, but ultimately did not enroll. Then we have that red line in the middle, which is youth that enrolled in our program, but exited early. And then finally, we have youth who enrolled in our program and saw it to the end. So that's going to be that orange line on top. And what we see is 3 years before program entry, these three groups are very similar, right? We have a range between 5K and 7K, but the clustering is really strong. Then when you get to that year 0, which again is program exit, you're already starting to see some substantial differences. Youth who enrolled in our program and exited early were earning 3,000 more than youth who didn't enroll in our program. And then youth who completed our program were earning 4,000 more than those youth, or twice as much as youth who were eligible for our program but didn't enroll. Then we see those gains continue to build after program exit. While the youth who exited our program early start to converge with youth who were eligible but did not enroll in our program, youth who saw our program to the end and who had the means and the support to see it to the end, they see not only that strong growth at program exit, but we see that that trajectory continues. Where at 3 years after program, they're earning 7K more than their peers. So this was huge. This was something we were very excited to see, and we felt very confident. All right, let's go do a formal impact evaluation, which Matt will talk about now.
Thank you. So yeah, I can't emphasize enough. This is actually can be really hard to do this step four, but if you can do it, it can so just de-risk it and make it more palatable, right? To go down this impact evaluation route because it's scary. What did they find out? There's no impact of our program. So again, we were lucky, right? There's a lot of administrative data, meaning there's secondary data already out there on employment, earnings, and education. If you're able to get your hands on some of that via partnership with a funder or directly with some of these sources, um, and you talk to some really smart people in your field, it can really help to identify what are ways to gather that data. So we felt with all of this, right, the data in hand, a sense that maybe there's some impact, some visible impact, at least in the lines. Let's see if it passes muster of a more independent evaluation from an external partner of ours. So we actually went back to that same funder Mike was talking about that got us this data and said, hey, would you help to fund an impact evaluation if we were to recruit an external evaluator? Would you pay for that? And so we got them to agree to that, and that allowed us to then kind of own this process from start to finish. And I don't know if that's always done, right? Sometimes organizations may hire evaluators themselves, sometimes maybe applying for a federal research grant or something else to get it. But there's something really nice and clean about this process of being able to kind of own and operate and manage this process internally with the support of our funder. So we crafted our, RFP, or request for proposals, and sent it out to the broader research community. Those we'd known and been in contact with over the years, and those we hadn't, right? We made sure to get this on several listservs and other sites as well. So we'd have a wide, a group of folks kind of looking at this and considering it. The other benefit of step four that Michael was talking about was we already had research questions. We already had data in hand. So a lot of that was just repackaging that in this, request for proposals. That was maybe a page or 2 pages long. Ultimately, right, we had some great proposals. We had a hard choice to make, but we did decide to go with Chapin Hall, right, one of the leading research groups out there in the child welfare field. And they spent 12 months analyzing this data, but also think about all of our steps before. They wanted to know what our fidelity was. Were our sites meeting fidelity? And they wanted to look at the other administrative data we had in our system and our logic model. So they were looking and assessing things we'd already done prior to this to understand the data they were looking at in terms of the outcomes and what that meant in terms of the actual findings itself. They also did a good job of meeting with our staff to understand the program model, meeting monthly with, Michael and myself and others, again, as they were going through the process to ask questions and think about what they were looking at. What did it mean? What did they find? So this is October of last year. This is again, this is from their website. They found that participation in My First Place is associated with better employment and educational outcomes among young people in extended foster care. So more specifically, they found that the completers, those who completed our My First Place program, MFP, were 1.7 times more likely to be employed at exit than non-participants. That's also a finding that holds after exit. So not just at exit, but after exit, higher employment rates. They also found higher earnings. The same group of completers were earning 65% more on average than those who never participated in our program. Again, those non-participants are eligible for our program. They're receiving other services. They're in extended foster care. It's just not from us. And so the youth in our program are doing better than those. And third is education. And so, yes, we're excited to see that like MFP participation increased college enrollment. But going back to our improvement section earlier, where we also wanted to see persistence or progress, well, guess what? MFP participation, no matter or not if you completed our program, increased college persistence, so kind of continual enrollment, by 38%. So we're really excited to see that there was some movement. We're starting to see some education progress metrics, not just in our own data, but from an external evaluator relative to some sort of comparison as well. So this was a big step for us, a really exciting one. And I think all of the other steps got us here. But we talked about a lot of steps. I think, Michael, you're going to recap for us again. What were those 5 steps?
Yeah, so we're getting to the end of our workshop. So just kind of wrap things up, kind of want to recap what those 5 steps were. So again, start out with a foundation. That's where you're going to build your th clear theory of change, a high-level logic model that you then flesh out, and describing what you do, who you do it for, and what you expect to happen as a result. Once you have that program model in place, up and running, then you want to conduct continuous assessment where you're honestly evaluating whether your program is ready to be studied. You're learning what are the strengths and what are the areas to improve. With that information of strengths and areas to improve, you use data to continuously strengthen what you're doing. So you lean into the things that are working and then also figure out, okay, how can we approach the things that aren't working differently and help them out? And then you start to analyze your data and program outcomes. You start digging into your outcomes in the analysis step to understand what's working for whom and where there are risks before putting the program to rigorous test. So again, for our own, that came to education progress. We did build out earn and learn programs. We did lean into a lot of it, but we recognized that that was the primary risk of doing a formal impact evaluation. Ultimately, we went with the impact evaluation and we made it to the impact evaluation step where we ask and answer the hardest question. Does this program actually make a difference? And in our own case, we found not only does it improve employment rates, it improves median earnings, and not only does it improve college enrollment or PSE enrollment, but it also improves college or PSE persistence. So now me and Matt are just going to kind of walk through where you might be in this step and what we would recommend as next steps for you. So if you're just starting here, if you're just getting started with this process, Matt, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So I think a lot of our group is already here from the start, but it really starts with that logic model, right? What are the activities? What are the key things your clients, your program participants are getting? And then what might you measure, right? What do you expect to happen from those activities in terms of outputs or outcomes? The second thing, since you're already thinking about activities, that means you're starting to gather a recipe. So create that recipe. Pick a few fidelity metrics that you might start to, that kind of speaks to what your program is, what differentiates it, and start to measure them. So that's really kind of grounding for so much of the evidence building piece. Any evaluator you work with is going to want to very quickly see a logic model and fidelity. So these are really good starting points. Say you're already there and you've got both those things in place and you're collecting data, you have a data system. Michael, what would you recommend? Oh, and I think you're muted.
Thank you, Matt. So yeah, so if you're already collecting data, obviously, maybe not obviously, but the next step then is to actually review that data. Data collection is a hugely important step. You want to make sure you're doing it well so that when you start to review it, you truly are able to answer your questions. So then you start looking at quality and consistency of program. Um, One way you might do that is hosting data parties. So that's where you bring in people from different areas and different perspectives. You might even bring in program participants and review the data with participants and peers and to actually understand it. And that's a way of getting lots of different perspectives in a room and making it feel a little less admin heavy, right? Like you can have open discussion like, ooh, let's explore this, or wait, let's go look at that. And then what we recommend also, and what we did ourselves, was conducting an evaluability assessment. Once you complete that evaluability assessment, Matt, what's next?
Yeah, I would just say like listen to those learnings. That evaluability assessment really shaped the future of our evidence building. I mean, it even led to positions like mine and Michael's being created, right? We had a strong data culture, but we wanted to enhance it further at first place. And so once having that listen and learn, and there's going to be some specific recommendations there, but classic to that, if you don't already have it, or maybe it's not as robust as you would like, is to develop and implement that continuous quality improvement process. Know that learning takes time. And so a lot of the like standard pieces about CQI may not work because it feels rushed. It's hard to learn, hard to innovate if it's rushed. So find ways to kind of draw out that timeline to not do 2 to 3 week cycles. We started with 2 to 3 week or 4 week cycles, and we would just never get anything off the ground. So think about space and time and patience with CQIs can be really, really helpful. Something we found changed the way we could do CQI. And then the natural piece of any quality improvement process is you end up adapting your program model, right? So if it works, right, what you're innovating on works and you pilot it, you can scale it, adapt your program model. Maybe that means you adapt your fidelity metrics as well. look at those results, and that can really help you get to this next step, which Michael, now we've done all this. What if we're ready for an impact evaluation? What do we do next?
Yeah, so the very, very first step, of course, is identifying a funder. We were fortunate in that a funder that we already had a partnership with let us know about an opportunity they have, but that's an essential aspect of doing that impact evaluation. Once you have a funder, then you start determining your most critical learning questions. So for us, it was how do participants fare after exiting our program? We already had a lot of evidence that at program exit, young people are exiting with this program education enrollment and with this, holding employment at program exit. But we didn't know how that was going years after. We had some follow-up data, but we didn't have near robust data to make this decision or to answer that question. Once you have those critical learning questions defined, then you want to hire a fantastic evaluator. For our own process, we put out an RFP. We ended up having to screen several amazing candidates and ultimately ended up with Chapin Hall, which we were very fortunate and very grateful for that partnership. And then you let them do the work. You support them along the way. We met with them monthly to review their progress and to provide our own perspectives. And that's the final step. Then they produce their work, and your question of whether the program is working is answered. So throughout this whole process, Matt and I have sprinkled in some little tips along the way. But some final tips we want to leave you all with is this idea of building incrementally and knowing things will take time. I think a lot of time there's this sense of urgency that's placed on like, we got to get this done, we got to get this done, we got to get this done. But the truth is like this for us was a several year process. And this is it's a really important process. It's not something you want to rush. You don't want to rush what questions you're asking. You don't want to rush your assessment or um, defining the fidelity metrics. So just keep in mind that this is an iterative process and it can take time. It's not going to be something that's done quickly. And in that whole process, you can expect both successes and setbacks. A success for us was, I mentioned a few times now, was this employment. And then our setback was like, okay, our education aspect isn't quite hitting the mark. And that's okay. We're learning and we grow from truly accepting where things are not working. And so that way we can focus and build on them. And then Matt, what are the last two tips you would share?
Sure. So none of this can be done alone, right? We all use this expression, it takes a village when we're thinking about individuals and families. This also applies to programs, right? The programs we work for and support and strive to lead, we can never do it alone. So much of what we've learned today or trying to distill today is thanks to those learnings from our peers, our participants, our mentors, our funders, right, as well. And last but by no means least, right, evaluation can often feel stale and dry or kind of off in the corner. Find ways to make some fun, right, with it. Connect with each other, build that community, have a meal, have those data parties, bring in silly cat photos and dog photos, whatever it is, right? Bring in a little bit of fun as well. It just makes it that much better, you could say. So we talked a lot about our process and steps. We want to make sure we also answer some of your questions or hear from you all. I will note there was one great question in the chat we haven't answered yet. I think from Janelle, just about programs like these are invaluable. How do we find them for these youth who are not in care? Do programs like this exist for youth who successfully reunified but still struggle with the impact of being in care? It's such a hard question, and I think I don't know if that question was about earn and learn or in general, kind of EFC, extended foster care programs. I don't know if you wanted to quickly clarify because there might be slightly different answers for each of those if you're still around and able to.
Well, one, I want to acknowledge that my question is off. I know this group is talking about evaluation and how you guys came up with all of this, but I can't help to just hear like how amazing the program overall is amazing, especially for our youth. So it was kind of off-topic question, like, wow, how do we get this other places for other youth who are not necessarily in care, but can grow from programs such as these?
I mean, not off topic at all. It's such an important question. It's one we think about too, right? Especially as there's a tremendous focus on prevention, on reunification. So what happens to those young people that may still need support when they turn 18? It's a big question we talk a lot about at First Place. And one of the ways we think about that question or a solution to that question is policy. How can we make sure that programs or extended foster care in general is accessible to those who have prior foster care history? Right? Maybe they were unified 13, 14, 15, 16. Should they not be eligible? Should they not at least have the choice to participate in extended foster care? Should they need it? Should they want it? We believe the answer to that is yes. We've had clients, our young people in our program, who have elected not to be reunified at the age of 16 or 17 to instead maintain their eligibility for programs like extended foster care, like ours. That is a very perverse thing for our system to be offering that choice and that calculus to minors, right? To teenagers. So we very much believe that can change. I will say it's not, so some programs, I think about like Cal State and some of their foster care liaison programs and things like that. There are a lot of programs out there that don't have an age eligibility or reunification exclusion criteria. So Cal State foster care programs will serve anyone. If you've had a day of placement in foster care, you can participate in their programs. So I think that's a really wonderful thing, right? So I think there are programs, not extended foster care, but there are programs that can serve some of those needs. But I think to your question, there's probably a need for more, and that's something we hope to maybe pilot from a learning perspective. We're trying to see if any counties are here, we're very open to piloting and seeing can we start to serve young people who've been reunified as a teenager and still have them be eligible for extended foster care if they so choose. Great question. What else? On topic, off topic. Let's have some fun with our final, 5 to 10 minutes here. Where else would you like to learn, or what other experiences? What resonated with your own experience of learning that you want to share or impart with the group here today?
If nobody else has any questions, I was really curious in like what your guys' sample sizes were and what type of sampling. I saw that there must have been some type of like interviewing or surveys
Yeah,
or something, but what type of sampling was done with
yeah.
these sample sizes?
And you're speaking specific to the impact evaluation, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
great
very.
question. Yeah. Michael, I know the answer, but do you want to take it?
Uh-oh. I believe it was 1600 or was it more
That's
20?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we didn't interview any youth participants for the sample selection. We were relying strictly on administrative data. So we have a pretty robust data system. Our YAs and EEs regularly enter in data about the young people into our data system. And so for youth from 2016 to 2022 who completed our program or who enrolled in our program, we were able to leverage that data. And then the comparison group, something that's really important in any of this work, we alluded to the beginning of like, we're not going to be able to talk about randomized controlled trials, which would be amazing. But there's huge ethical concerns of saying like, hey, we're going to give you these services and we're not going to give you these services, right? So that's not really something we can do. So it's really hard to come up with a comparable control group or counterfactual. And what we ultimately decided on doing was looking at youth who applied for our program and went through that initial interview process and were ultimately offered position in my first place, but declined to take it for whatever reason. And then to project their year of exit, we used the mean year of exit for their area. So for Contra Costa, if youth in our program were typically there for 400 days, then when that youth who didn't enroll in our program, we would say like, okay, but had they enrolled in our program, they probably would have exited around 2022. So that's how we decided the sample and the comparison groups. So that's something that, we're always open to other ideas on how to explore that. That's what we ultimately decided on in our own process. But I
Mhm.
really can't emphasize like it's really difficult to come up with an accurate counterfactual because comparing our youth to youth in the general population who have very different lived experience isn't quite comparing one to one. So that's a great question. Thank you, Janelle.
I'll just add perfect answer. And just to add that, so we're using quasi-experimental methods, right? So we're making a lot of assumptions here, right? That the young people who didn't enroll are similar enough to those who did enroll. And we did have some demographics and things to compare against. The thing with our education data that Chapin Hall did, that was a big reason we actually chose them, is they leveraged a technique called propensity score matching to create basically matched samples, so groups that are very similar statistically in size, demographics, and other variables of those who never enrolled in our program and those who did, and then compare their outcomes. So if we've had 1,600 names to pass on in terms of education data, the propensity score matching meant that actually maybe they're only looking at, I don't know, 800. I'm making that number up. I don't remember off the top of my head, but they're filtering out clients or cases that didn't match up so that we'd actually have some statistical confidence and what we're looking at and the results of that manipulation, right, of the data as well. Not an uncommon technique for quasi-experimental methods, and I think an effective one here. And I think it's one we're seeing more and more, right, leveraged in our sector. Great
A question in the
question.
chat from Vera. Any tips for engaging frontline staff in data beyond compliance measures? So that is a great question, and it is something we continually struggle with. We have a lot of staff have very strong buy-in and they're very eager to do these brown bag interview and data parties with us. And then we have other staff who they have a lot going on. They don't have time for that. So one thing that I think we do particularly well is we try to make the data much more approachable by like relying heavily on visualizations, right? So our frontline staff do have access to dashboards, and that's a lot easier to look at and digest than a big, you know, unwieldy spreadsheet. Instead of looking at data like that, we're able to put it into a few simple figures, and then we walk the staff through that with them, right? To try to show like, hey, here's how you can get value out of that. I don't know, Matt, do you have any other ways that we get ROIs and EEs buy-in?
Yeah, well, one thing that was really interesting when talking to staff about, like, hey, we really need your help in tracking this data and like entering this data on a timely basis. And we'd ask folks about like fidelity. I'd be like, well, do you know why we track fidelity? And there'd be silence. And so we're like, whoa, there's this whole gap that people don't know why we do what we do when we're talking fidelity, when we're talking outcomes. So part of it is telling that story of why those metrics matter, why we track fidelity, right? So that I think helps with kind of understanding that. Compliance also may mean that that's tied to funding. So one other response, I think, is just that sometimes we have to say, look, we got to do this like extra data work because that's what pays the bills. That's what gets our young people their services, our salaries, our benefits. So that is also helpful. I think sometimes people don't always know those connections as well. Oh, folks want a visual example. Let me see if I can pull something up without showing any client information.
That's true, that might be difficult.
What else? Questions? Actually, I think maybe we could look at our fidelity dashboard because that's just showing sites and then even has some youth voice in there. Um, okay, let's share this. Just so you kind of get a sense, since we're talking fidelity earlier, this isn't our most dynamic and interesting dashboard, I would say, used by our social work staff, but is one way in which we're trying to make the information visual, colorful, and easy to understand. So we can kind of choose, a site. Santa Clara is actually an interesting story of a site in terms of meeting fidelity. So, we just say, hey, yeah, there's 12 different metrics, but on average in a month, how many are you meeting? Because our fidelity standard isn't about passing every metric, it's about passing most of them. And so the story here, right, is that Santa Clara was actually struggling with fidelity for the last 4 months, October through January, due to kind of, unexpected leaves and other reasons, right, related to staffing primarily. But they really surged in February, right, to meet it. And not only did they meet it, they literally passed every metric, right? So they met all fidelity metrics in February, which we just love those stories. So that's one way in which we empower managers to understand their story with fidelity. So up top, right, is fidelity. On the bottom, staff can see, which metrics they're meeting. Are they doing action plans on time? It's a 5-point scale, and they can kind of see month to month how they did for that thing. So then they know where to coach and lean in. So I think this has helped, right? And this is a tool, to Michael's point earlier. We make sure to provide it not just to our managers, but to all staff. So if they want to see how their site is doing, their county's doing, or even their own caseload, right? They can see that. We try to make that available to them.
I also just want to call out, Matt, that like this was a huge part in that kind of iterative using data continuously to improve program. So one of the main things that we noticed that Contra Costa, Santa Clara, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Santa Clara was not meeting fidelity on in the beginning was that Y engagement. So I don't know if you all noticed, but it started out low in those first few months, right? And so that led to discussions of like, okay, what's going on here? How do we get that Y engagement up? And then you start to see a clear linear progression, right? It wasn't the first month after we had those conversations that things got better. It wasn't the second month. It was by continually having those conversations and identifying what barriers were leading to that Y engagement that then ultimately allowed our program managers to move the needle. And now, like Matt just showed, in February, they hit every fidelity metric, which is huge.
Great question. We might have time for one more quick answer, but I also want to give folks extra time back if you want it. So, any last questions or comments?
We did have one question in the chat.
Oh, please, I missed it. Sorry.
No, you're fine. There was a question about what app do you use for that visual?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we use Power BI, right? But I mean, plenty of peers we know just use Excel, download the data and create Excel dashboards because that's often accessible and easy. Power BI is a Microsoft product. So if you're already in the Microsoft universe of products, which many nonprofits and government people are, you often already have Power BI, or you can add it for pretty cheap. So that was a big decision for us to use this platform was we already had access and could actually provide access to all of our staff, not just managers. Great question.
You can just Google search like free BI tools to look at some other alternatives too.
Yeah.
Tableau is one, Looker is another common one that you might see thrown around, but we use
Yeah, even Google Data
Google
Studio,
has.
if it's still
Mhm.
called that, that's a free one. But then just be mindful if you're using any free tools of how they use your data,
Right.
right? Because if you're inputting any private information, right, that's going to have data security issues that are very real. So always partner with IT on any of those as well. Well, thank you. We are honored and privileged to have so many of you join us today. I think our emails are in the agenda, but just our first and last name at firstplaceforyouth.org. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you.